Okay, well, this is it. The end of the journey, the final class. So we've done a lot this year, right? Last semester, we did the great books, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Bible, the Republic, the Divine Comedy. This semester, we did how screwed up the world is, right? The world is hopeless. We're all going to die. And in this final class, I want this class to be about hope. And I want to show you the future. And the argument I want to leave you with, the thing that I want you to remember is that, remember Dante in Divine Comedy said that the future is not what happens to you. It's not something that you wait for. The future is what you imagine and fight for. The future is what you make happen. There is a God, but God gave us the ability to imagine and the capacity to love. And it's these two things that will guide us and enable us to build a better world. Okay? So that's a message I want to give to you today. The future is what we imagine, not what we have to put up with. So if we don't like the future, if we don't like the way we live our lives, then we can change that with our imagination. And today I want to show you how. So just to summarize what we did this semester. Together we analyzed the world, and we made certain predictions about the world, right? For example, that Trump will be elected again in November, and that he will declare war on Iran. And this war in Iran will be a disaster for the United States, and it will mean the end of the American empire, and it would lead to a multipolar world, which will mean endless war and the deaths of millions and billions of people. And because of climate change, our world will eventually collapse at some point, okay? So this is an extremely hopeless, an extremely bleak and dark picture of the world. But remember, where there is darkness, there can also be light. So in this final class, I want to show you some hope and some light, okay? So this is what we call psychohistory. And psychohistory is the idea that the future can be predicted. And if it can be predicted, then it can be controlled and harnessed for the betterment of humanity, okay? So where does this idea come from, psychohistory? In the 1950s, there was an American science fiction writer named Isaac Asimov. And he's probably the most famous science fiction writer. Okay? If you happen to read science fiction, he's really famous. And he wrote a series called Foundation. And I think there's a TV series now based on Foundation books. It's terrible, but you can have a look at it. And in the Foundation books, he introduces the idea of psychohistory. And so this book is set in the future, like 1 million years from now, where there is a galactic empire. So humanity has colonized the entire Milky Way. There are billions of planets. And there's an empire that brings peace to this Milky Way. But with all empires, it has to collapse. And this will lead to 30,000 years of war, violence, barbarity. And the Foundation proposes a new science called psychohistory, which is to mathematically map out human behavior over the course of 1 million years. If you do that, what you discover is that there are certain patterns to human society. Okay? And if that's the case, then you can predict the future If you can do that, then you can manipulate the course of events to make a better future, okay? So this is what they call psychohistory. And it's a science fiction concept. And a lot of people have been trying to make it into reality, okay? So there's this very prominent historian. His name is Peter Turchin. And he's one of the founders of something called Cliodynamics. Okay? And Clio is the goddess of history. Dynamics just means movement, okay? So basically, Cliodynamics is trying to figure out the mathematical movement of history. He's trying to create history as a mathematical model. And when he did that, there's certain interesting trends and patterns that he discovered. Okay? And one idea that he discovered is something called the overproduction of the elites. Okay? Overproduction of the elite. And this concept explains why societies collapse. Now, traditionally, we've understood the collapse of societies as having to do with maybe like too much debt, or too much inequality, or maybe climate change, or war, right? What Peter Turchin points out, and it's a really interesting idea, is the reason why societies collapse in the end is you have too many elites. All right? So let me explain the concept. Okay, so society has many elites, right? You have people like Jack Ma, right? You have people like Zhou Xun, Zhao Wei, right? Movie stars. You have famous military generals, okay? So over time, elites become more and more numerous, right? The number of wealthy people go up. The number of famous people go up. The number of entrepreneurs go up, okay? The problem, though, is they all want power, right? Now, wealth and fame are all infinite resources, right? But power will always be a finite resource. In fact, it's what we call a zero-sum game. So, for example, in this classroom, there can only be one teacher, right? If we're all teachers, there's no teacher. So, in society, there can only be a few powerful people. If everyone has the power, no one has any power, okay? So what happens over time is that all these people who believe they should have power struggle for power. And because there are too many of them, this internal struggle of the elites ultimately leads to social collapse. Okay? So the most famous example is in China, in Imperial China, where you had the Keju system, right? People taking the imperial examinations to become an official. Problem is, you have too many candidates, not enough positions, right? And guess who ultimately gets upset with society and leads revolutions? It's the Keju candidates who do not become officials. And so they become angry, and they lead revolutions to overthrow the society, right? So the most classic example of the failed Keju candidate is Hong Xiuquan. Do you guys know who he is? The leader of the Taiping Rebellion, right? Why did he become a Christian? Why did he lead the rebellion? Because he failed the Keju. Okay? So that's the idea of the overproduction of the elite. And he discovered this principle using mathematically modeling of history. Okay? He just compared different societies and tried to figure out why they collapsed. Okay? And what he discovered is, well, it's because of the internal struggle among the different elite groups. Okay? And that's why the Roman Empire collapsed as well. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. What I'm proposing to you is that we can actually go a step further than what Peter Turchin is doing. Because we have something called AI. Okay? Artificial intelligence. And we can harness the power of AI to create real psychohistory, which is the ability to not just analyze the past, but to predict the future. Okay? All right. So let's first figure out what AI is. Okay? So first, I want us to understand what artificial intelligence is. Because most of you think you know, but you don't actually know, okay? So what is AI? All right, the AI, the technical term is supervised machine learning, okay? That's the technical term. AI is the popular term, but supervised machine learning is the technical and correct term. Have you guys heard of this term? Supervised machine learning? Yes or no? Have any of you taken computer science? Okay, this is called supervised machine learning. Okay, so what is this? Okay, so in computer programming, you're taught to write the algorithm, right? And then the input. You put in information, it gives you the output. Okay? And this is traditionally how computers work. You write the algorithm, the computer program, you put in information, and then there's an output, right? For example, the algorithm could be like A plus B, okay? So you put in two numbers, 2, 2, you get a 4, okay? That's how computers work, right? Now, supervised machine learning is that I will turn the output into the input, okay? And the reason why I want to do that is that as a human being, I myself may not be able to write the best algorithm. So I want the computer to refine the algorithm for me, to optimize it using the output, okay? Does that make sense? All right, so let's talk about a very specific example. All right? So let's look at facial recognition technology. All right, you go to the airport and you scan and they know who you are, right? You go to a supermarket, you scan your face and you pay, right? And you're like, wait, how does that work? Okay, so how this works is that there's a database, okay, about 1 billion people, like everyone in China. And now what I need to do is figure out how to differentiate the faces of everyone in China in this database. Okay, does that make sense? So what I do is, for the face, I create a mathematical model based on topology. Okay, does that make sense? Topology. So I turn everyone's face into a mathematical model, okay, which looks like something like this, okay? And you're like, I don't know what this is. Okay, you don't need to know what this is. This is like super complicated, okay? But all you need to know is that within this model, there are different equations, okay? So for example, this model is trying to analyze the distance between your eyes, okay? And how big your nose is. All right, does that make sense? All right? And so once I create this mathematical model, I am now able to differentiate everyone in China. Does that make sense? Okay? In fact, this mathematical model is so precise that I can only look at your eyes and I know who you are. Okay? Because what I'm trying to do is match what your model with a model in a database. All right? But what's important to remember is that if you're not in this database, you can't be recognized. Okay? Do you understand? All right. Now, what I will show you is how this model is created. So what happens is this. All right? What I do is I teach the computer how to create this database. So I have input, I have output. And then what I do is I create a working thesis or a working theory of what this model should look like. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so it could be like this. All right. And then what I do is I put faces, okay? And the output should match what's in the database. And if the model returns something that's different, and I tell them this is wrong. And what the computer then does is refine this model until it becomes this. Does that make sense? Okay? So what all AI is infinite iteration. Okay? Does that make sense? All right? Okay. So the problem with AI is I need to be able to solve 3 things. And if I can solve 3 things, then I can create an AI. Okay? The first thing is that I need clear metrics, okay, or clear outputs. Okay? Does it make sense? I need outputs that I can define as a mathematical model. Okay? So, for example, if I'm an airline, I'm going to use AI to maximize the amount of money I make on a flight, right? Okay, that's my output. How much money can I make out of a flight? I want to have the maximum amount of profit, okay? That's the first thing I need to solve. Second thing I need to solve then is data, okay, for input. But the thing about data is that it has to be clean, okay? Does that make sense? It has to be a clean data, okay? So for example, if I want to teach this AI to recognize different animals, I need to give it different data sets of different animals, okay? Does that make sense? I need to label my data. But I can't make an AI that's like, this is the best ice cream in the world. And the reason why is I can't find data on the best ice cream. You understand? Because the best ice cream is subjective. So I cannot turn that into a data set. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. The third thing I need to do is create a working algorithm structure. Do you understand? Okay? Computers can only refine and optimize the algorithm structure. It cannot create it by itself. Okay? So if I'm able to do all 3 things, then I'm able to use AI to optimize what I wanted to optimize. Okay? All right? Any questions so far before I move on? Okay? So what this means is that there are certain problems that I can solve using AI, and there are certain problems I cannot solve using AI. Okay? So what are easy problems that AI can solve, right? Well, for example, facial recognition technology, okay? Also, translation software, right? I can create an optimal translation software. Also, recommendation engines, right? So if you watch a movie on Netflix, it recommends then another movie, right? Okay? Now let me ask you this question. Can I ever solve self-driving cars? Can I ever solve self-driving cars? Self-driving cars. Can cars drive by themselves? Yes or no? Why yes, Sally? Okay, the answer is no. Why is the answer no? Okay, the answer no is whatever I do, okay, I cannot solve something called the edge case. The edge case is if the car is on the road, what could happen that would screw up my AI system? Do you guys know? Why can't self-driving cars be solved? Why can't we have self-driving cars on the roads? What's an edge case or this thing that I can never solve? What is it? Excuse me?
That they cannot solve issues that's not planned.
Yeah, and what is not planned? They can plan for traffic. What can they not plan for? And this is why we'll never have self-driving cars. They can plan for accidents. What can they not plan for? Easily plan for traffic rules. What can they not plan for? Okay, guys. The edge case with self-driving cars is if I, as a human being, intentionally want to crash into that car. You understand? Does that make sense to you guys? Every other situation I can plan for. But in a situation where I'm the human being, and I don't like self-driving cars because I'm a taxi driver, and it's stealing my job, right? It's stealing my livelihood, and I want to crash in that car, there's no way for that AI to avoid the accident. Does that make sense? Okay? Listen. AI is a scam, okay? It does not exist. What exists is supervised machine learning, okay? What is supervised machine learning? What I just told you, okay? That's it. That's the extent of our technology. It does not have self-awareness. It can only do what the algorithm tells it to do. And there's no way you can design an algorithm that plans for and prevents a human being who intentionally wants to crash into you, okay? Does that make sense? All right? So AI, in other words, is an extremely limited tool, okay? So you think about actual applications of AI, it's very limited. You also look at self-driving cars. Now, there are cars that have self-driving features, but they are not 100% self-driving, okay? Does that make sense? In fact, they tell you, don't rely on the autopilot, okay? It's there to help you, but don't sleep in the car, okay? Right? Because they don't have an AI system in place to prevent people from crashing into them, okay? Does that make sense? All right. So now that we know what AI is, let's talk about how we can use AI to predict the future, okay? Okay? All right. So basically, what you need to do is three things, right? You need to be clear about the output. You need to have clean data. And you need to have a working algorithm, okay? Does that make sense? And so that's what I've been doing this semester, okay? So for example, remember my predictions. The Israel lobby, Saudi Arabia, and the American empire, basically the need to protect the petrodollar, will force America to go to war with Iran, okay? These are the push factors. The problem is that there are no force to counteract this, okay? So for example, the military will be for this because they have shock and awe, and they are very confident they can win this war, okay? Iran itself wants this war because it wants revenge against America, okay? And then the president of the United States, who will be Donald Trump, he wants this war in order to cement his position as president, okay? And so because of this, we can predict that there'll be a war in Iran. Does that make sense? Okay, now, given this prediction, what we can then do is use mathematical modeling and statistics to turn this into an AI model. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, now we have the AI model. Now that we have the AI model, what we need to do now is to refine it. And the way we refine it is by going back in history and looking at every single war that started, okay? Does it make sense? And so you take this model and you look at the different wars, okay? So for example, the 415 BCE invasion of Sicily by Athens. You look at 1941, Operation Barbarossa, okay? You have basically hundreds of wars that you can look at. And then you take this model and then you test it using each of these wars, and what will happen is that the model will begin to refine itself. Okay? Does that make sense? So it becomes more and more refined. Okay? But then that's one model for what causes war. I've also said that Trump will become president, right? Well, then that's another model that you can use. And once you start putting all these models together, what eventually happens over time is you develop psychohistory. Okay? Does this make sense, guys? All right? So now the question then is, okay, how would this AI model work? Or what are sort of the ideas behind this model? Okay? So we talk about game theory analysis a lot. All right? And the idea of game theory analysis is that, okay, guys, there's really no good and evil. Okay? There are different players in a game, and they're all self-interested. They all want to win this game. So they're going to develop strategies that optimize their ability to win this game. Okay? So you can use game theory analysis. But then you can also develop new ideas that would help you better understand how the world works. Okay? So let's talk about certain ideas that have come up in this course. All right? So one thing I want to talk about is this week's European elections. Have you guys seen the news? The elections to the European Parliament, right? And the results are pretty shocking because it signals a clear shift to the right. So, for example, Marine Le Pen's party in France picked up a lot of votes. The AfD, the Alternative for Germany in Germany, which is considered a right-wing organization, almost neo-Nazi, has picked up a lot of votes as well. The results were so dramatic that Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, has called for an early election. And it's possible in 3 months' time, Marine Le Pen's party will run and govern France, okay? So how do we explain this shift to the right? And I want to explain 3 reasons, okay? The first reason is anti-immigration. Okay? So for the past 10, 20 years, there have been a lot of immigrants to Europe from Libya, from Syria, from Iraq, Afghanistan, Sudan, Somalia, okay? These are mainly Muslim people who threaten the Christian social fabric of Europe, okay? And now Europeans are rebelling or revolting against that. Second thing that they don't like about Europe so far is the idea of federalism, okay? Or they can say bureaucratism. But it's the idea that a foreign power, Brussels, mandates rules that they must follow. So they think it's very anti-democratic, okay? And the third thing that they're rebelling against is the idea of pan-Europeanism. What the people of Europe are saying is there's no European identity, guys. There's a German identity, there's a French identity, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, but there's no European identity. They're rebelling against the entire project of the EU. In fact, I would bet that in about 5 years' time, the entire EU would be dead, okay? Okay? Why are they opposed to Europeanism? Because ultimately, they believe that it's about destroying local identity. It's about destroying local community. It's about destroying my relationship with my neighbors and my friends and my relatives, okay? And my family. Does that make sense? Okay? It's imposing a foreign identity on me. And proponents of the European Union would argue that, no, this is just a secular, liberal idea. Okay? The entire idea of the EU is that for hundreds of years, thousands of years, Europe has been at war. Why has Europe been at war? Tribalism, right? Religion. So the entire project of the EU is to get rid of the factors that lead to war. Local identity, nationalism, religion, right? And what the European voters are saying to the EU is, sorry, we don't want secular liberalism because we want to be human. Okay? What we strive for is not an abstract liberal idea. We strive for structure, meaning, and purpose in our lives. Okay? What we really strive for is the capacity to love, create, and learn, okay, and grow. Does that make sense? That's what we are fundamentally as human beings. And when you ask me to obey an abstract foreign entity that is very far from me, then you are limiting or destroying the structure, meaning, and purpose in my life. Okay? And so that's what's going on, not just in Europe, but throughout the world. You think about Brexit, right? You think about the election of Donald Trump, right? All these things has to do with this fundamental human urge to have structure, meaning, and purpose in our lives, okay? To have agency. Okay? Does that make sense, guys? All right, any questions so far? Yeah, Eric?
What is the source of imagination and willingness to create?
Okay, so Eric asked, okay, what is the source of all this? And what Dante and Homer would say is the human heart, okay? The human heart. This is just who we are. And if we cannot fulfill our human heart, we will rebel. We will destroy. We will want to kill. Okay? And so in other words, one idea in this AI model is that there is a fundamental underlying structure to human society. Okay? If society conforms to the structure of the human heart, this society will prosper. For example, Athens, right? The ancient Greeks. That society prospered. The word we used was eudaimonia, right? Okay? But if a society represses the human heart, then ultimately the society will have to collapse at some point. Okay? So that's another principle that we can use when developing this AI model. the last idea that we can use in developing this AI model is the idea of synchronicity, okay? Synchronicity. And the idea of synchronicity is, as a society, how willing are people, how willing are people in following the rules? Okay, does that make sense? So when you drive the car, do people actually follow traffic rules? When you're in the subway, do people actually give up their seats for the elderly, for children, for pregnant women? Okay? When you go to the park, do people actually pick up garbage and throw it in the garbage bin? Okay? Synchronicity tells us that there's cohesion and trust in society, that society is resilient, okay? And that society can grow, okay, or learn from its mistakes. Okay? So societies that have high synchronicity will do better in the long term than societies with low synchronicity. And so societies with high synchronicity would include Japan and Germany, right? And societies with low synchronicity would include India and Brazil and China, okay? Does that make sense? All right? So these are all of the ideas that we developed this semester or in this year, that there's an underlying truth and meaning to human society. And if we embrace these truths, then society will prosper. But if we try to deny these truths, then eventually society will have to collapse and we have to start over again. Okay? Does that make sense? Any questions so far? Yeah, Celine?
So because, like, if we embrace the human heart and society will prosper, then why will we suppress it?
Excuse me?
So why would society suppress it?
Okay, that's a great question, okay? So one thing that was not supposed to happen is the idea of mass society, okay? Mass society. You can say that mass society is a complete, what's the word I'm looking for? Deviation from human history, okay? We're not supposed to have supposed to have mass society. And mass society is complete an accident, a historical accident. But when you have mass society, what happens is that you need an elite, okay? You need an elite. But guess what, guys? The elite, the people in charge, they're not better than you and me, okay? Do you understand? We in this classroom could swap for the leadership of the world, right? And guys, nothing would change. You understand? Right? So you have mass society, and therefore you have to have an artificial elite because you need people in control. And because they're in control, they need to now maintain the illusion of their power. Okay? They need to create fictions. For example, maybe, well, I went to Yale or Harvard, and therefore I should be at the top. Or maybe I have a higher IQ than you do. Or maybe, my dad or my great-great-great-great-grandfather was king. Okay? They have to create these fictions. Now, what happens over time is that these fictions fall apart because they're not that competent, okay? And the most recent example is you look at the global management of the economy, and you look at the global management of, like, COVID, okay? You look at the global management of war. It's pretty incompetent. And so people sort of wake up and like, wait a minute, these guys don't really know what they're doing, okay? And now the elite is now forced to suppress us, okay? They have to lie. They have to use force to make us obedient, okay? And that's what's happening today. And so this repression can go on for a long time, but to control us, they must repress the human heart, okay? Because it's in the human heart to want to question, to be curious, to grow, okay? And if you think like the people in charge don't know what they're doing, then you're sort of compelled to challenge them. And so what they have to do is suppress the human heart. And they do that by trying to get you to focus on buying things rather than thinking, okay? Does that make sense? Okay. All right, any more questions?
Yeah.
Yes, Sally?
The working model that the AI uses.
Yes.
It's based on, well, it analyzes our beliefs, wants, and needs that drive us to certain actions.
Yeah, and it has to turn it into a mathematical model, okay? Do you understand? The human heart has to become like a model, like facial recognition model. Okay? Does that make sense?
But our beliefs, wants, and needs change all the time. So how does the model account for the changes?
Okay, so Sally's question is, isn't it true that we're all individual and unique? And isn't it true that over time we change, okay? And that's a great point. But what Homer and Dante would say that, no. At the fundamental level, okay, we all have the same desires. We're motivated by the same needs, okay? There's no one in this world that does not want structure, meaning, and purpose. Now, the way you want to achieve this may be different, okay? But that's your underlying motivation. And there's no person in this world that does not seek to have to achieve these three things, like love, create, and grow as people, okay? That's when you achieve full happiness as a person. When you feel that you're married to someone you love and you have children, when you're doing a job that is creative, and when you're constantly learning every day and growing every day, okay? When you achieve that, these three things, what do we call this? When you achieve all three things, what do we call this? Eudaimonia, right? This is eudaimonia. This is what the Greeks meant by a happy and self-fulfilled life. Okay, does that make sense? Okay? So there may be differences in needs and motivation, but at the fundamental level, we're all human beings, and we're all driven by the same fundamental needs, okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay?
And for this AI to work, to predict the future,
Yeah.
we would need to feed it a lot of data.
Yes.
So does that mean we need a very powerful surveillance system?
Okay, so Sally asked the question, like, how do you construct this AI, okay? And so for this AI to be valid, okay, let me explain how we would actually implement, okay? So first of all, you need at least 50 to 100 years to actually create this AI, okay? And the reason why is that for this AI to be valid, you constantly need to be testing it, okay? So what I've been doing in this class is basically doing a self-AI, right? Where I have an analytical model and I have a prediction. But guess what, guys? We won't know if my predictions are fully correct until like 50 years from now. Is that correct? Okay. Therefore, I can't validate my analysis until 50 years from now. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. And you need to be constantly doing this, where you have to be constantly making these predictions and seeing if they're correct or not. If they're not correct, what you have to do is go and change these predictions, okay, and analysis, okay? Does that make sense? Then what you have to do is you basically have to, and this is actually what's the most time-consuming is, you have to rewrite history. Okay, do you understand? Because most of history is actually not correct, okay? So what you have to do is you have to take this AI model and look back at history and says, according to this AI model, what actually happened in the Peloponnesian War? What actually happened in World War I? What actually happened during the Tang Dynasty? Okay? So you basically have to challenge the entire discipline of history and reconstruct a new history that you think is more factually correct based on this AI. Okay? So you have to be doing these two things at once. Okay, making these predictions and seeing that you're correct, but also going back to throughout history and seeing how history can be revamped or changed so that it's more accurate. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, that's a project. But then there's the technology, because you actually need mathematicians and computer programmers and historians to collaborate together to build this AI, right? Okay, so I can tell you how I would analyze the issue, but then a mathematician has to turn this into a mathematical equation or a model, okay? Because computers only recognize like data and numbers, okay? They don't recognize ideas. I can't talk to a computer. I have to give a computer like a number or a equation or a model, okay, for it to calculate on. Okay, does it make sense? All right. So it's not an easy project, okay? But the argument is that if this project actually works, it would change the fate of humanity forever. Because if there's one thing that you notice in this class, it's like we tend to repeat the same mistakes, right? And the question is like, why do we do that? It's because the history that we have is complete bullshit. It just is. It's not true. It can't be true. Okay? There's things that we believe which, if you just think about it, can't be true. Okay? And we did that like last semester when we talked about the rise of Christianity, right? You're telling me that this illiterate guy named Jesus was able to spread Christianity all by himself after he died? I don't believe that. Okay? I think a much easier explanation is that it became co-opted by the Roman Empire in order to control the empire, right? But if you would talk to a historian, they would say you're just wrong, okay? So not only are you trying to predict the future, but you're trying to also correct the past, which is, I think, an even more difficult job, right? Any more questions? Yeah, Eric?
Well, this psychohistory model encounter any edge cases?
Excuse me? Oh, so Eric asked a great question. Will this psychohistory model encounter edge cases? And the answer is, that's the best question, okay? That's a great question. And the answer is, yes. What are edge cases? Do you guys know? What are edge cases in this model? What would be edge cases here in history? Okay, it's called great man theory, okay? Great man theory. And this is a problem, meaning like, okay, we argue that these underlying historical forces control humanity, right? But now and then, you have this great man come out of nowhere, and he changes the course of human history forever, okay? The example is before we had Homer, right? Then we had Dante. Then we had Plato, Jesus, Julius Caesar, Octavius, Putin today, okay? We can't account for these people because by definition, they're beyond history. They can step outside of history and control history. That's what great men are. So how does your model account for that? Okay? And the answer is you cannot. So in foundation, okay, the solution, okay, well, there's a solution to this. The solution is to create another organization. Okay, remember that psychohistory is an AI model. It's basically a computer. But as Eric points out, you will always have edge cases. You'll always have someone appear out of nowhere. And if for whatever reason, he's able to manipulate events to control and direct history in his favor, okay? So what you do to solve this problem is you create another organization, okay? And in Isaac Asimov's foundation, it's called the second foundation, okay? And the idea of the second foundation is that there is the computer, there is the AI, okay? But behind the AI are a team of specialists who observe the AI and who observe history and who correct the AI for edge cases, okay? Does that make sense? So if Putin appears and is like, okay, well, clearly I'm not accounting for Putin, well, then I change the equations in the AI to account for Putin, okay? So this team of experts, the second foundation, will correct the AI, right? Now, what's interesting about the second foundation is that these people are telepaths, okay? Telepaths, meaning that they can read your mind. Not only can they read your mind, but they can control your mind, okay? So, and that's another really interesting thing about psychohistory. Like, okay, there's a promise that we can predict the future, but there's also the promise that within our minds, there are some special abilities that we might have the potential for, but we never, ever fully attempted to achieve, okay? Does that make sense? And is it possible in the future that telepaths will rise? I think yes. And the answer is that you can make the argument that these edge cases that Eric refers to, these great men of history, they're actually telepaths. Okay, does that make sense? They're actually telepaths. So someone like Putin, why is Putin able to do what he does? And you can make the argument like he has almost some telepathic abilities, okay? He can read other people's minds, and he can control other people's minds. How else can you explain that someone who does not come from a special background, right? He's not of the Russian elite, but he's able to amass so much power all by himself in only a few decades, so that today he's basically the emperor of Russia. And all of Russia heeds his command. Russia just moves the way that he wants it to move, okay? So you can make the argument that Putin is almost a telepath. And is it possible that in the future we'll have more telepaths? And we can, over time, harness the power of these telepaths to create the second foundation and to control psychohistory. Possibly, right? Okay, because like how else we explain great men, okay? You look at someone like Homer and Dante, right? The only explanation that you can have for Homer and Dante is they had God-given gifts, okay? Or maybe God was speaking to them. Or maybe they were just speaking for God, right? That's the only explanation that you can have for Homer and Dante, because they so clearly stepped out of history and directed history. Okay, does that make sense? Okay? But thanks for the question, Eric, okay? So edge cases are great men who appear now and then, and you cannot ever predict these people. Okay? Any more questions? Okay. This, yeah, yes, Celine? Oh, that's a great question, okay. Okay. How do you model love, learn, and create, okay? And the answer is that there has to be a certain amount of autonomy or agency in the lives of people. Does that make sense? What we call freedom and liberty. Because if you have freedom and liberty, then you're able to do what you want. And what you want to do is love, create, and grow. Okay? Does that make sense? So you need to model agency and freedom into the structure. Okay? The second thing is social interaction. Okay? In other words, the more we're able to interact with each other, the more we're willing to love, create, and grow. Because these powers come from others, right? You can't love yourself. You have to love someone else. You can't create by yourself. You have to create in a group, okay? And you can't learn by yourself. You have to learn from others. Okay, so you also have to model in as much group interaction as possible. Okay, and the last thing is you also have to model in the idea of compassion. Okay, so the idea here is that if I all put you on an island together, okay, and you must survive, well, you will become compassionate with each other because that's the only way to survive, right? But if I put you guys into a bank and I say to you that if you make $1 million, then I will give you $2 million. Whoever makes the most money, I will give a Ferrari to. Guess what, guys? You will all hate each other. You will all want to kill each other, okay? You understand? So this model also has to factor in compassion. How compassionate is the society? Okay? Because if you have compassion, then people are willing to work together. If people are willing to work together, then people will have the greater capacity to love, create, and grow. Okay? Does that make sense? Actually, guys, we have all these theories. It's just like no one's turned this into a mathematical model, okay, for society. Any more questions? Yeah?
Human technology, human society, figure out or study out the source of all of these unconscious desires in a more like scientific method. For example, like telepathy, as you mentioned before, neuroscience.
Yeah, so Eric asked the question, is it possible to completely understand human behavior and motivation? And there are two different ways of looking at the issue, okay? The first way is to use the social science approach, okay? So you look at economics, psychology, anthropology, sociology, right? What are they trying to do? They're trying to figure out mathematically what drives us, okay? Do you understand? But there's another approach. It's called the literature approach, which is that we can actually quantify or explain human behavior, okay? But there are truths that can be expressed in literature, okay? Does that make sense? So think about the very first book we read, the Iliad, right? Where Achilles has killed Hector and Priam wants the body back. So Priam sneaks into Achilles' tent and kisses his hand, right? That moment. You can never mathematically express it. You can only write about it. But think about how much truth and power is in that one scene. Okay? Does that make sense, Eric? Okay? So again, I think like someone like Homer and Dante, like their mission is to express to us in the most beautiful way the human truths, okay? Like what drives us. And Dante is very explicit. He says that what drives us is love and the willingness to imagine, okay? That's who we are. If we love, we'll be more human. If we imagine, we'll be more human, okay? And that's really the argument I make as well, all right? And that has to be the underlying truth of whatever AI model that you create, okay? All right? Any more questions? Yeah?
Love, create, and learn is what humans fundamentally want to do. Why would human like destroy ourselves and rebuild again every time?
Okay, so Celine asked a great question. Okay, well, if it says that we want to love, create, and grow, then why do we end up destroying ourselves? And the answer is that love and hate are one force. You understand? If I can't love you, I'm going to hate you. Do you understand? Okay? Guess what, guys? Creation and destruction is one force as well. If I can't create, then I want to destroy. because my need for creation can't be satisfied. Does that make sense? So a society that nurtures our willingness to love and create and grow, like the Greeks, will flourish, okay? But eventually you reach a point where the elite have amassed power, they've centralized and consolidated power, and so they want to turn everyone else into basically a slave. When you're a slave, you can't love, you can't create, you can't learn, you can't grow. Therefore, you rebel and you destroy the society. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? But again, the fundamental human need are these three things. But within each of these things is another force. And if love can't express itself, then hate will express itself. Does that make sense? Okay? All right. Any more questions? Yeah?
If we ever created this AI, like, who is wise enough and responsible enough to use this AI, look into the future, and possibly determine the fate of everyone in this world?
So Sally asked a great question, which is like, who would control this AI? And how can we ensure that this AI is not exploited by the elite in order to justify their corruption and cruelty, okay? And the answer has to be really the second foundation, okay? Basically a group of scholars, academics, experts who dedicate themselves to this AI, okay? And this AI, the other thing is that it has to be open and transparent. That's why it's so hard to build, right? It has to be open and transparent, okay? If it's open and transparent, then everyone has to agree that this AI is going to be used for good, okay? Meaning that what this AI does is you can ask it different questions, and it will give you different scenarios. And we can all agree on which scenario we want. And therefore, we can agree on what action to take, okay? So this AI has to be part of a democratic system where everyone is involved. Otherwise, as Sally points out, it can only be abused, okay? It can only be used to oppress others, okay? But the point of this AI is that it gives us a platform as humans to agree on certain actions that we must take together. Okay? Does that make sense? So for example, we can all agree that climate change is bad. We can all agree that war is bad, right? But this AI will actually give us solutions to these problems, because this AI can map out the future for us. And this AI will say, well, listen, if the United States intervenes in Ukraine, then this will happen, right? The United States attacks Iran, then this will happen. And that becomes a very powerful argument for correct and proper behavior. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. But again, guys, this is just conjecture, okay? And I've already said this. It's going to take at least 50 to 100 years to build this AI, and you will be up against tremendous opposition, right? Historians aren't going to like this. The elite aren't going to like this, right? But at the same time, we have to remember, like, guess what? Homer, I'm pretty sure if Homer were living in a centralized society, the elite would be opposed to him, okay? Because he was making fun of very famous Greeks, like Achilles and Menelaus and Agamemnon, right? He was making fun of these guys. Well, guess what? When Homer was writing, society had collapsed, right? When Dante was writing, society had collapsed. So if it is true, if my predictions are correct and society is approaching collapse, then there should be a lot of space and leeway and flexibility to create this AI, okay? Okay, any more questions? Yeah?
Well, do some people
That's a great question. So if won't different people, different nations want different outcomes? And the answer is yeah. Like if you are alive today, if you're America, you want America to be the hegemon. If you're Putin, you want Russia to be the hegemon. If you're China, you want China to be the hegemon, right? You want different outcomes. So my argument is that the structure of society today is not sustainable. Everything's going to collapse. And we are going to transition from a population of about 8 billion people to a population of 1 billion people. And when you have 1 billion people and like there's no place to grow crops and pollution is everywhere and war is everywhere, guess what happens? Humans are united in their goals, which is basically how do we create a better civilization? Okay? Does that make sense? When all society has collapsed, everyone's like, how do we recreate civilization? That's the goal. But in a more progressive, more democratic, and more prosperous way. Okay? That's what I'm betting on. But I don't know, okay? And again, if everyone's fighting over the AI, this AI cannot be created, okay? Because different people will want this AI to be biased in a different way. And this AI can only work if it steps outside of history and steps outside of human interests, okay? If it's speaking for all of humanity rather than one nation or one group of people. Okay? Any more questions? Is this clear to you guys? All right. So, So this is the very end, and I'll spend like 5 more minutes to talk about this year. Okay. So, this is the very first time I've taught both courses. Okay. In the first semester, we read the great books. And I was blown away by how much you guys enjoyed the great books and how much you benefit from reading the great books, okay? And quite honestly, I don't think anyone has tried this before. I know there are great books courses in university, but not at the pace that we had, and certainly not at the level of difficulty that we had, okay? So you guys should be proud of yourself because the Great Books courses was very hard. And you enjoyed it. Even today, most of you really like the Iliad, right? You guys still remember the Iliad and think very highly of it, okay? So that's very impressive, so thank you. This semester is also a new course where we looked at geopolitics. And I'm also very impressed by how much you've grown as well in this course. The way you guys think, it's much more logical, much more analytical. You guys are asking great questions, okay? So thank you again, because you don't have to work hard in this course, but you chose to work hard. And this is going to carry you very far in life, okay? So the course has come to an end, and I will share with you why I teach this course, okay? Because as some of you know, I do have a very prestigious education background as well as a career background, okay? And I could have been, a lawyer, I think? A lawyer, a rich lawyer, a professor, okay? But instead, I'm teaching high school in China, right? Why am I doing this? It's because I have 3 kids, okay? I have three young kids. My eldest is 6. My youngest is only about 8 months, okay? And as a father, you have to believe in a better world. But not only do you have to believe in a better world, you have to imagine, you have to fight for it. Because you have to leave behind a legacy for your children, okay? So why I teach this course is to bring you a message of hope, okay? Like through your own imagination, through your own hard work, you can create a better world. You don't have to sit back and just let the world happen. You don't have to wait for the future. You can make it happen. And if you really work hard at it, you can make the world a better place. And I think like this year has proven to me that I can make the world a better place if I work hard, because I've seen the growth in all of you, okay? So I hope we can stay in touch. I hope that you will tell me how you progress, because I'm very confident that all of you will do very well in university and in life. And maybe at some point, we can share this dream of psychohistory, you know? I know it sounds very complicated, it's very abstract. But to make this work, you need a lot of people working together, okay? And it's something that's going to happen tomorrow, but it's something that we might come back to later on in our lives. Okay, so that's it. Thank you, and we'll stay in touch, okay?